Hello everybody, my name is Dr. Laserbeam, and this is League of Legends 101, where I go over certain parts of the game, League of Legends. Today, I'll be going over drafting. I'll be going over the basics of this topic, including the pros and cons for each side, followed by examples of why a draft is good or bad towards the end of the video. So before we get into discussion of how to draft, you need to understand the actual order of draft. So I numbered each step of the draft, pretty much on this nifty little tool that you can find online. I'll be sure to link this tool in the description should you want to use it. So over here we have blue side. How the draft starts off is that blue side will get first ban. This will be followed by a red side ban, followed by another ban on blue side, and another ban on red side, and then so on for the third ban for each side. There's a bit more to this if you want to do advanced drafting tactics, but for now that's all you need to know. After the 6 bans are chosen, it is now blue 1, aka B1, as the 7th step that comes in. Then it'll be followed by R1, R2. Now difference between blue 1 versus R1 is that R1 is also selected with R2, meaning red side gets 2 champions instead of 1 at this particular step in the draft. This is also true for blue side, where after R1 and R2 occurs, step 9 occurs, which is blue 2 and blue 3. And then before more bans are rolled out, we actually get to R3, which is step 10. After red side picks their third pick, we actually move on to a second phase of banning. Red actually starts off with step number 11, banning whoever they want, and then blue will ban, and then red will ban, and then blue will ban again. And then red actually gets a first pick here, aka R4. After this happens, B4 and B5, aka blue 4 and blue 5, happen together as step 16, and R5, which is the last step, will occur here as well. Now let's talk about what makes each side strong in their own unique ways. First off, we'll start with blue side, and we'll start by talking about B1, aka blue 1. Now, this is the first pick of draft, and this is huge because this pretty much allows you to pick a very powerful champion right off the bat. This could be a power pick in the meta, something that's really good regardless who you pick it into. It could be a flex pick, or it could even be a takeaway pick, taking away a champion that you don't want to ban, but you don't want your opponent to play either. After blue 1 will come R1 and R2, which I'll explain when I get to talking about red side. However, we're going to only focus on blue side currently. After red side gets their 2 picks, you're going to have B2 and B3. Now, there's a few different ways that you could actually use B2 and B3. You can use it as a reaction to what your enemies picked, or you can actually focus on taking away power picks that may still be available. Well, I would love to give examples. I want to make this video as timeless as possible, so I don't want to say something that is true now but may be false in a few patches from here. Instead, I'll be actually using examples from the most recent worlds at the end of this video to get you an idea. Now, after you do blue 2 and blue 3, the red side is actually going to have their last pick before the next ban phase occurs. Again, bans are very important. However, there is so much variance, I cannot possibly explain it here without giving you guys actual examples. So that's why I'm going to do it towards the end of the video. But just note that blue 4 and blue 5 is basically safe picks and what works with your team. It's not so much about power picks at this point as for pretty much most metas. At this point, you're going to be picking what's left and actually what works with your team. So if you have a composition that is very good at split pushing with your first 3 picks, you probably want your blue 4 and blue 5 to match that. Now, red side strategy is a bit different from blue side strategy. While they may not have the first pick, R1 and R2 is still a very powerful tool. You see, what you can actually do here is that depending on the meta, you could do one of 2 things. You could either, 1, pick 2 very strong champions that are very powerful by themselves, or 2, you can also pick 2 champions who actually work very well with each other. So maybe this is your bot lane, or maybe it's a mid and jungle duo. It's really whatever the meta is asking of you and actually how you're able to adapt to that meta. So with that being said, these are 2 general good strategies that you can do, but there may be metas in which the draft looks a bit weird, a bit different than this, but overall this should cover about, I'd say, 90% of them. So the way I look at R3 is one of 2 ways. You can either see this as your last chance for a power pick, or you can do it as a reaction pick. And what I mean by this is that if you pick two solo picks, such as a strong ADC and a strong jungler, and your enemy showed their bot lane, for example, you could counterpick their support with R3. Another option that you can do is that you can forego your counter pick in the support role, and what you can actually do is pick a strong solo laner. So you can get a secure pick for a top lane instead, or perhaps a mid lane. Again, it really comes down to what exactly they're doing on the other side, and by the other side I mean blue side in this case. So you really just gotta analyze what is their game plan at that point and adapt from there. Now R4 is interesting because it is pretty much a strong blind pick that you have to pick at this point, or you have to pick whatever is left over in reaction to a role that you didn't pick before. So for example, if you didn't pick for your support in the first rotation of picks, but your enemy support did, then you have to determine, okay, what is the leftover supports I could actually pick from that will be effective both for my ADC and also be effective into the enemy support that they locked in. So it really, again, depends on what is banned and what happened in the first part of the draft. This is a very high variance part of the draft, so I can't really say any definitive advice for this certain part. Now R5 is pretty much the opposite of what you think would be if you're pretty new into drafting. You think last pick, oh, it's so lame, I'm getting the bottom of the barrel. No, you're actually getting the counter. This isn't like dodgeball when the weak kid is picked last. You actually want to give your strongest pick to the R5 here. So at this point, your enemy has shown everything, you have shown everything, and then you just have to decide what is the last piece of the puzzle. So a very traditional R5 pick would be pretty much counter top lane, you know? Maybe they picked Ornn, and you could just like pick Fiora, you could pick Jax, you could pick GP, basically stuff that you can get away with. It basically just guarantees that R5 is always going to have a counter pick no matter what happens, or they may actually be able to flex it. You'll see examples of what I'm talking about exactly towards the end of this video, but just know R5 is very, very attractive. Now I'm going to give some general tips as to what you should be thinking about when you're drafting. The first and most important thing is think about your solo lanes. If you're going to pick for your solo lane and you haven't seen what the enemy has picked, you need to pick something that is relatively safe. A good historical example of this is Orianna in the mid lane. She pretty much is just a wave clear machine, so even her worst matchups is actually pretty tolerable. For what you can actually do is just minimize the lane. So a classic pick would be Echo. Echo just absolutely nukes Orianna, but what Orianna can actually do is that she could just play the wave clear game, keep getting prio on Echo. And this is why we actually see Orianna played so much and the Echo doesn't actually get counterpicked into her as a response. It's just because of wave clear. It's very safe if a champion can just do that because it actually prevents them from interacting with their lane opponents. So if you're thinking, what is a strong pick in the solo lane that won't get smashed if I pick it blind? Just think, oh, I just need to pick a champion with wave clear. The second thing you should be thinking about is duos. You should be thinking about your bot lane duo and then your mid jungle duo. Whichever one is more important really depends on which patch that you're on and how the meta is looking, but just know that you need to pick stuff that actually works well together. So if you have a weak 2v2 in the mid lane and jungle area, then that's just going to be terrible, especially if it's a meta which jungler is the main focus, or perhaps it's even the mid lane that's the main focus. They're like the main carries. So you need to really keep in mind, what is the most important duo that I can possibly get? A good example of this would be Echo Kindred. It pretty much provides a mixed damage profile in AD and AP, and then you actually have a melee champion paired up with a ranged champion. Basically, the more variants you have, the better. Now, this isn't going to be a universal fact, but just take that as a general tip. Now, when it comes to bans, there's basically two different philosophies that you could take. You could either, one, focus your bans on power picks, so just anything that's very strong in the meta, or two, you could just ban what is strong relative to who's piloting it, so what the enemy champions, or enemy players rather, are playing. I've noticed that people usually do the former at higher levels of play and do the latter with lower levels of play. So really just determine what you think is probably the most appropriate for you. And just actually think, well, even if I give them like a powerful champion, can they actually pilot this champion? Because it doesn't matter how strong a champion is if you can't actually play it. So just keep that in mind. Now, you might be asking, well, how am I going to improve my drafting skills over time? And I think there's actually 3 ways that you can do it. The first one I would say, and probably the most important one, is you just need to understand the bigger picture. When you are given 5 champions, how should they operate? Should you be focusing on taking towers? Should you be focusing on split pushing? Should you be focusing on just poking them out and then just letting them come to you? You really just understand how 5 champions operate as a unit instead of individuals. This is something that pretty much comes with time and basically looking at professional play and seeing how they actually do it. Again, I actually will come up with examples of this and tell you, hey, these are 5 champions, this is how they should work given these conditions. Now, the second most important thing I would say is you need to understand synergy, which goes back to my general tips where you need to understand how duos pretty much work. You need to understand, okay, still looking at the big picture, but focusing a little bit on maybe the top left part of this picture. Hey, how do these 2 champions interact? Do they have a lot of setup? Do they have a lot of synergy? Is their profile and damage very different? So basically think about it this way. If I have a jungler and if I have a laner, does this laner actually have CC to set up a good gank? Or if that's not true, does a jungler have CC actually to help gank? And if the answer is no, then the odds are is that you have a very bad synergistic duo. You basically want to be able to think, how many things can I actually do with this duo? Or if you have very special conditions, you need to be able to think, okay, if I have these 2 champions, how do I make the rest of the team actually work with this? Again, this is a very complex thing. You need to be able to understand not only what works within your own role, but what works within outside your role, and how do those factors pretty much interact with each other. Also, just one more note on synergy. You can actually have 2 champions who don't have good synergy just like with each other, but they can actually have synergy as a whole in the sense that these 2 do not work well just one-on-one, but if they're put in to a 5-man composition, it actually works well. Think about this like a band, like if you just have the singer and the drums, like, whoa, what the hell is that? Like, that makes no sense. You're not going to be able to make really good music with that. But if you have the singer and the guitars, then hey, you can actually make this duo work. But then if you have the singer, a bassist, a guitarist, and the drums, I mean, oh my god, it's just going to be a fantastic performance. So you need to sort of think about like a band. Now, the last thing I would say to improve your drafting skills over time is that you just need to understand matchups. First off, whatever your role is, if you're a jungler, mid laner, top laner, support, AD, just understand, okay, if I'm facing this champion as playing this champion, is this actually good for me in isolation? And then you need to consider, once you actually get a good understanding of your own role, hey, does my mid laner actually have a good matchup, or is it a bad matchup? What can they do at level 6? Does this person outscale? You just need to be able to understand, hey, how do these people interact on a 1v1 situation? And then you need to expand your knowledge out there from that 1v1 smaller picture sort of view. Now, one last note before I get into the examples. You need to understand one thing. League of Legends is always a changing game that has yet to be solved. And what may look like a good draft to one person may actually be a bad draft to another. And you also need to just consider, if somebody tries to tell you, hey, this is absolutely a good draft or absolutely a bad draft, no matter the situation, you need to really question that person. As a matter of fact, you should never be getting your information from one person. Certainly not me, and it doesn't matter who it is. It could be Reaper, it could be LS, it could... Well, I mean, if it was God, then, you should probably listen to God. But, besides that, nobody actually knows League of Legends that well. What you should actually be doing is that you should be talking to friends, your teammates, maybe mentors, see what they think, what their perspectives are. And then you basically want to take all those opinions, including your own, and average it out. And then you're probably going to gain a rough idea of what is actually good at any given time in League of Legends, but you will probably never get a perfect picture. So now let's get into actual examples of drafting. We're going to be taking a look at a strong blue side draft, which is going to be DWG or Damwon Gaming's draft. So what we're going to actually look at is, first off, what do each team actually ban? So right now we're actually going to see that Damwon Gaming decided to go for a first ban Camille. Now what this tells us is that Damwon doesn't want to pick first pick Camille top, as this was pretty common for blue side, but they also do not want to give Suning it for any reason. This is usually done on red side from what I've seen, so interesting that they decide to opt for that, but not in any way. A Nilly ban is something that we actually usually see on the red side. She was the second, actually no, she was the third most picked jungler after Graves and Nilly at Worlds, and was considered to be a good counter into Graves. So this could be encouraging Damwon Gang, saying, hey, pick Graves, there's not too many options left that we can actually use against them. So now we're going to see what they do for blue 2 ban. And then, yeah, blue 2 ban is going to be Syndra. Syndra is also a fine ban here. She's a highly sought off after mid because she's extremely blindable. This is pretty much the most blindable champion in mid lane besides Orianna, I would say. So completely fine, especially if they have no plans to first pick it. Lucian Red completely makes sense. This was actually the highest presence champion in Worlds 2020. It's just because Lucian was busted in the mid lane, and if you basically do not ban it on a red side, blue side is going to first pick it every single time. It was that strong as a power pick, which is something that I mentioned before. Blue side wants to use that first pick usually to get something that is extremely strong or extremely dynamic. Now the third ban here is going to be Jhin. What I would say about Jhin is that he's a strong champion in general, especially during this meta, and he was especially a good choice when you would pick Ashe. So this tells me that Damwon Gaming is possibly looking into an Ashe pick, although it's extremely unlikely that it's going to be a first pick. TF ban here is completely fine. It's basically, in my opinion, a champion that Suning just simply does not want to give Showmaker, not only because it's a champion that Showmaker can actually pilot very well, but I'd also say more importantly, it's a champion that would really put a cap on what Suning like to do as a team. They're a very rough and dirty team, and Damwon Gang is very controlled, very precise, and TF would really put a nail in Suning's general game plans. Damwon Gaming's first pick is going to be Graves, and the reason behind this is that it's pretty much just because it's a power pick, and it's extremely blindable. Graves, at least in this meta during Worlds 2020, pretty much worked in any composition. It was seen as a power pick in its own right, so there was really no reason for Damwon Gaming not to pick it. Suning decided to respond with Ezreal and Leona on R1 and R2. Now, Leona is a fairly blindable champion. She doesn't have too many bad matchups, and is actually one of the most contested supports in Worlds 2020. Now, the problem I do have here has to be with Ezreal, as even though Ezreal is a pretty safe champion to pick in the bot lane, he pretty much lacks in the wave clear department, which means he won't be there in time for dragons. It basically gives Damwon Gaming a little more priority in lane. It gives them tempo. So it was overall a safe bot lane, however it does have clear weaknesses that I just stated. Damwon Gaming ran the first half of the draft with Ornn and Orianna, which I think, looking at this trio, is very, very blindable and efficient. Now, I would say this because all three of these champions don't have terrible matchups, in my opinion. Again, I would say that Ornn, even if he gets a bad matchup such as Fiora, for example, he can just play the farm game, minimize Fiora, and actually spike in the mid game and play for team fights. Same thing goes for Orianna. Very blindable, just plays a wave clear game, and can minimize even her worst matchups. And when you actually look at the composition, as Ornn, Graves, and Orianna so far, they pretty much cover a lot of the checklist things that you would want in a comp. They have a front line so far, they have AD threat, and they have an AP threat. So this really opens up their bot lane to adapt to whatever type of playstyle that they might want. They could play through bot, or they could actually play a very slow and methodical game plan. And this is just because of how flexible these free champions in the first half of the draft are. Now, Suning's response to the Orianna is going to be Azir, which is completely fine. This is a very even matchup, I would say. Orianna does have slightly better prio than Azir. This mostly just comes down to the fact that Orianna pretty much moves her ball, presses W, and then the wave is pretty much gone, where Azir has to take a bit more time using his soldiers actually to wither down the wave. And also, I would say that they have pretty similar functions where they're looking for the team fight. However, Azir is pretty much going to outperform Orianna when it comes to extended team fights, and Orianna is going to actually excel when it comes to shorter team fights. So it's going to be interesting to see if they actually play to this condition, or if the pace of the game actually forces them to adapt to a different type of play style. Now, Suning's first ban is going to be Fresh, and to be honest, this does make a bit of sense. I would say that the biggest advantage from this is that Beryl is quite proficient at Fresh, but also more importantly, Fresh by many pros is seen to be a counter into Leona. So this is sort of a double reason that Suning would want to ban him. Now, Damon's fourth ban is going to be J4. Now, if you're just looking at this at champions, this is absolutely baffling. Why do you want J4 in this composition? He's a very early game champion, and you have Ezreal and Azir pretty much who scale up the entire game. Now, what I will say, however, is that J4 does have quite a nice synergy with Azir, but I would say even more importantly, SOFM, the jungler for Suning, is actually extremely proficient with J4 and is actually one of his comfort champions. While most people, especially junglers, would look at J4 and would say, hey, just literally give me anything else during Worlds, SOFM was actually one of the people who even before Worlds was actually pretty eager to play J4. So I would say this is a champion ban, not so much in the sense that they were scared of the champion itself, but more the fact that who would pilot the champion. Suning's fifth ban is going to be Caitlyn, which makes a lot of sense. They're already kind of lacking in the priority department and wave clear department compared to their counterparts. So if you give them Caitlyn against Ezreal, Caitlyn's really going to be able to punish Ezreal for his scaling nature. So I think Suning sort of realized this and decided to try to minimize that in draft. So Damwon Gaming's fifth ban is going to be GP. Now what's interesting to think about here is that GP, I would say overall, is a weird ban, but he's alright in this context. For if they actually did pick a GP, as in Suning picked GP, they would have free scaling lanes with no prio, meaning they would have to completely invest into the late game, which is pretty much not ideal unless you have a meta in which scaling is completely the norm. This was not the case for Worlds 2020. I would also say that he isn't terribly bad into Damwon's gaming's comp so far. Typically GP is good when people can't actually get out of his ultimate very easily. This would create a headache for Ornn and also for Orianna. I would think that what happened here is that Damwon Gaming didn't want an easy lane for Bin, and also maybe they just didn't want to deal with the heck of that what GP provides. So Suning's R4 pick here is going to be Shen. Now, Shen is not terrible here. As a matter of fact, he's actually pretty decent into Ornn. He can also be flexed in the jungle if they so wished. However, the only thing I would want to see if he was jungle Shen is that you need somebody to actually enable. So far, you don't really have anybody to enable. You go and enable Ezreal, Azir, that's not ideal. They need to scale up. You can pretty much leave them alone. So if this is Shen jungle, you want something that you can actually enable top, but the ideal situation here is probably just send Shen into a good matchup into Ornn top anyways. Now, Damwon Gaming decided to opt for Ashe ADC, which is completely fine into Ezreal. The one thing I will say about Ashe is that she does get hard outscaled by Israel, but you have to remember this is a 5-man game. So actually, when you think about it in this context, Ashe pretty much has an advantage when it comes to wave clear. What do Damwon Gaming have overall as a team? They have a lot of wave clear, especially compared to their counterparts so far. This means they get to objectives faster. It means that they control the flow of the game better. So overall, Damwon Gaming have a more control style comp, while Suning actually has a more aggressive scaling comp. And by aggressive, I mean not so much in terms of early game aggression, but rather, hey, we're going to wait until we hit a certain power spike, and then we're going to just go all out from there. So overall, the Ashe pick is fine. The only problem is that if you just look at it in a 1v1 situation, it is not ideal. But again, think about this in the bigger context. So Damwon Gaming's last pick is going to be Pantheon. And Pantheon is pretty good with what Damwon Gaming have so far. Basically what the Pantheon pick is here for is they're saying, hey, I'm going to use Ashe to actually get Prio in lane, and then I'm going to actually roam, pretty much maybe help out the Greys, maybe help out Orianna if she needs help with the Azir matchup. Basically, they're just using Ashe as a way to get good wave clear in the bot lane, and they're using the Pantheon to actually do something with that roam timer. It's a very overall nice comp, I would say, but let's take a look at what Suning do for their last pick. So Suning's last pick here is going to be Wukong, and this just baffled me. They decide, hey, we're going to do Wukong top, and we're going to put a Shen in the jungle. Now, let me tell you why this doesn't make sense. Wukong into Ornn is not exactly an ideal matchup. Usually Wukong is picked into AD matchups top, first off, and Ornn is actually magic damage. Also, Shen was already a fine pick into Ornn. If they really wanted to get something to counter top, you probably would have wanted to see something like a Fiora possibly, maybe a Jax. Jax is really well known for, Ben is really well known for his Jax. So this just makes no sense to me whatsoever. The comp is just all over the place. So with that being said, why does Damwon Gaming, in my opinion, why did they win this draft? And I would say it's just because they have easier execution, they have way prio, and also it's just better matchups overall, I would say. When you look across the board, there's no lane that has hard lost, and Damwon Gaming have the easier time winning the game than Suning do, who have to rely on late game team fighting, which is not nearly reliable as Damwon Gaming's objective of just, hey, take turrets, we're going to take Herald and Dragon and just stack those up slowly, and then try to close this out by the mid game. So overall, I would say that Damwon Gaming does have the superior draft here. And one last thing, maybe you're thinking, well, Dr. Laserbeam, what could they have done to actually make their draft better? Well, I would have actually had Shen go top and then pick Kindred, because Kindred actually suits the scaling theme that is going on with Suning, and also Kindred is completely fine into Graves. It was sort of a handshake thing where Graves actually won in the early game, but Kindred would outscale, and Kindred was actually better overall in the team fights with the ult, where Graves was better in little skirmishes and all that. So overall, they would have a complete handshake, but instead Suning kind of throw a wrench in their own plans. Perhaps they had their own idea of how Wukong was supposed to be played, but overall, just looking at the public knowledge that Suning has shared, which pretty much is nothing regarding this draft, that's all I can really say. Now, let's take an example at a good red side draft, and you're going to actually see something interesting here when it comes to blue side's draft or top esports draft. And what you're going to see right here is that they are going to actually first ban Shen. Now, this is interesting because a Shen ban wasn't actually often seen too much. Shen himself was actually a pretty decent champion regardless of which side it was being played on, but this is actually targeted at Solo, who's used to playing weak side and actually has found his most success playing Shen. So this was a ban not so much about the champion himself, but again, who is piloting it. Now from FlyQuest, their first ban is going to be Lucian. This actually makes a lot more sense in the previous example I used, because when you ban Lucian on red side during this meta, it tells the enemy team that you have pretty much have shown nothing to them, because everybody has pretty much agreed, yeah, Lucian is pretty dang busted. Let's just ban him as soon as possible and not give it to blue side the first pick. So this is actually an example of how your banning order could actually give your information or prevent them from gaining information. In this case, it's preventing. And we're going to actually see that their second ban on blue side is actually going to be Renekton. And you're probably wondering, wait, Renekton Shen, these are two very different champions. Why would they ban it? Well, actually, this is because Renekton is Solo's best champion when he's actually playing strong side. So they're basically saying, hey, we're going to take you off your most comfortable champions that you found most success in regards to both strong side and weak side. So this is a very player-oriented ban phase, I would say. FlyQuest opt into the Naily ban next. I would say that what is interesting about Naily is that although we've seen teams ban her on red side quite often for the reasons I stated previously in the first example, what's interesting to know is that FlyQuest actually in 100% of their games ban Nidalee. So this may be telling a story. Perhaps Santorin is not comfortable on Nidalee, maybe he's not comfortable playing against Nidalee, or maybe they just think it is a stupidly busted champion at the moment. So again, this is a type of draft where I think there is a lot of story behind these bans. I think teams come in with these perspectives and ideas of how to actually play out the ban phase and how it should be used. So this is just an example of how two different teams from two different regions could drastically think that there's different ways to approach this game when it comes to the pick and ban phase. Now, Top's third ban here is actually going to be Syndra. Now, this is quite interesting if you look at this in the lens of just looking at Knight, because Knight was actually extremely successful with Syndra. He had a 100% win rate whenever he was able to get it, not only through Worlds, but also in playoffs leading to Worlds and also during the regular season. But you also need to consider who your opponent is. Power of Evil is also a very skilled Syndra pick, and this ban also makes more sense if they had no plans to first pick Syndra, and it could just be seen as, hey, we don't want to first pick it, but we don't want to give it. So that means that we have to ban it. This is an example of where you're giving information to the enemy team through what you're banning. The last ban here by FlyQuest is going to be Senna. Now, why they banned Senna was probably because of Jackie Love. Jackie Love showed a great love for playing Senna when it was available, and I would say that Top Esports in itself is actually not too much of a bot-centric team. They usually actually played for their top laner and sometimes for their mid laner. However, I would say that as the meta in Worlds continued, mid lane was not so much important in terms of carrying, but more important in terms of, hey, how can I enable my jungler? So this could just be seen as taking away a comfort pick for Jackie Love, and overall pick that identifies with what Top Esports actually like to do as a team. Now here we're going to see Graves' first pick again. Again, this is for the same reasons that we have seen before. Nidalee's off the table. Nidalee's good into Graves. Graves pretty much has good matchups all around the board. He is very blindable. Think about all those reasons. Now FlyQuest responses by picking Ashe. Ashe is pretty much a blindable ADC, completely fine. And this makes a lot of sense with Lilia. Lilia is a champion that actually works well when she's able to pretty much get like a sticky team comp and allow her to pretty much get her passive off, which enables her to use her ult, which is the sleep that you'll see. Basically, this is actually a pretty good synergistic ADC jungle duo, and that's usually not a duo you think of. You usually think of like mid lane jungle or bot support, so I really like this from FlyQuest so far. Now, Top's response into the Ashe pick is going to be, interestingly, Caitlyn and Lux. Now, when you look at Caitlyn and Lux, this is actually a nice duo. They do have a lot of synergy with each other. However, even though Caitlyn is fine here, Lux doesn't know who the support pick is going to be. So what we're going to actually see here is that how you can get screwed over when you reveal a champion who's not very blindable, such as Lux. Now, Ignar tells his team here, hey, give me the Blitzcrank pick. And this makes sense for a number of reasons, but I'll give you the two main ones. First off, Blitzcrank excels when it comes to facing squishy compositions. If there's no frontline, Blitzcrank actually becomes very ideal as he's able to pick people off with ease. I would also say another thing is that Ignar is actually a huge fan of Blitzcrank, so this is a comfort pick for him as well. this was just the stars aligned for this Blitzcrank pick. And also what it does as a third effect is it forces top esports to pick more frontline champions, otherwise suffer the wrath of the Blitzcrank pick. After the Blitzcrank pick, the first ban by FlyQuest is actually going to be Ornn, and this makes a ton of sense. Ornn is a fantastic blind pick into their composition, and also I would say that Blitzcrank does not want Ornn to be in the game, because again, he wants a lot of squishy champions. He does not want any frontline if possible, so very wise by FlyQuest. Now, next ban that we're going to see out of top is going to be Volibear, and this is one of those interesting bans where, again, I think it has to do with the player themselves, because we don't see Voli as a very high-proud pick in top lane, and usually what we've seen, especially done by solo, is actually Volibear would be picked into Camille. So this could be seen as top esports saying, hey, we banned Volibear, so you gotta ban Camille, otherwise we're just straight up going to pick it. So that could be one possibility. Also, for those of you wondering, wait a second, FlyQuest has red side, couldn't they have just not banned Camille and picked it? There's one thing to consider here, and that's you have to consider who's piloting it, and that's Solo. Solo, if you actually take a look at the statistics, does not actually have any games on Camille when it came to playoffs, and when it actually came to his entire most recent split in the LCS. So again, this could be one of those things where Solo doesn't play it and they do not want to give it. Now, top's last ban here is going to be Orianna, which is completely fine. Orianna is a comfort champion for Power Evil, very blindable. It's pretty much just a standard okay pick. Perhaps they didn't have anything else that they really wanted to ban from Power of Evil. So FlyQuest decided to opt for the Azir pick for Power of Evil. Now, Azir is a blindable champion. However, this is not very good with their team. It doesn't actually identify with what Blitzcrank wants to do. It's alright with Ashe, but it's not too great with Lilia. And it's not a very good 2v2 in the sense of a mid-jungle duo. So why did they do this? And I would say it's because, one, again, it is because Azir is a fairly blind pickable champion, but two, it's just Power Evil's champion pool. This man plays pretty much mages exclusively, so there was no way that we were really going to see any type of AD option, which is pretty much lacking in the Worlds department anyways. So with that in mind, the Azir pick is fine. At this point, top is probably feeling pressured because any champion they pretty much pick in mid lane is going to get screwed in one way or another, because of the fact that any squishy champion that they're going to pick is going to be countered just by the fact that Blitzcrank exists. So what they decided to do, they decided to go with the one of the few champions that can actually deal with that, which is Galio. Now when we're talking about Galio into Azir, it's alright. The thing is that pretty much Galio just wants to get out of the lane, Azir just wants to push him in 24/7. It's not extremely interactive. But more importantly, the Galio pick was just in response to the Blitzcrank pick. They need to stop this somehow, because if they keep picking champions that Blitzcrank is going to enjoy facing, they're just giving FlyQuest a win con that they have possibly set up for themselves. So unfortunately, Knight had to be forced onto the Galio here. Now, top decided to opt for their last pick on blue side to go with the Urgot pick, which seems a bit wild to me. There was a few blindable champions left. I would say the most noble one would be Sion, but Urgot is just a very weird champion, even when you consider, hey, look at this comp. What does Urgot pretty much do with it? Does it work well with Galio? Does it work well with Graves? It's not exactly a exciting pick by any means, and it's not a great blind pick. So I think top really kind of butchered their fifth pick here. With only their top pick remaining, FlyQuest decide to go with a Gnar as a response into the Urgot. And these are just two champions that we have not seen at all in Worlds pretty much, not even in the play-ins. So what I would say about this 1v1 matchup is that it's kind of uninteractive. Urgot will win extended trades with Gnar, but Gnar is also ranged, so he could sort of just play the scaling game and wait for the mid game where they could actually shine. It really comes down to how the early game is played with both compositions, but when you think about it in terms of who has the easier time actually executing and who actually forced the other team to adapt more, it would definitely be FlyQuest in this case. This is just because of the Blitzcrank pick, which I think was so powerful in this drafting phase. So now we're going to take a look at what I consider to be a strong creative draft on red side by Unicorns of Love. But before that, let's take a look at what the bans are going on for V3. Now, the first ban that V3 decided to do is going to be Evelyn. Now, it is insane to me that they would ever ban Evelyn. This champion tells a lot when you ban it. It's saying, hey, we're possibly looking to split because Evelyn is a champion that basically says, hey, you can't split because once I reach level 6, I'm pretty much invisible throughout the map and you have to track me through actually my camps rather than wards that reveal my location. So overall, this tells a lot to ULL right off the bat, and also it's just not a champion that you can blind. So I think this is just a terrible waste of a first ban by V3. Unicorns of Love decide to ban Lilia. Now, Lilia, just face value, is a fine champion to ban. It's a very strong pick. However, you must also consider who's piloting it on the other side if you give to him. And Bug-Eye was actually somebody who, in the playoffs before they qualified for Worlds, actually spammed Lilia. He actually had a very high success rate, I think only actually losing one game with it. So this is just a champion that you did not want to give the man. This is a case of you have to look at who's piloting it versus the champion themselves. V3 decided to ban Lux, which didn't make too much sense to me. I did not enjoy this ban very much because there's just way too many ways to deal with a Lux pick. It could have been that they were anticipating that perhaps since ULL is a pre-creative team, they might have done a Lux flex, but I just overall did not think this was a very wise ban for V3. ULL decided to ban Ashe, and I would say that this is an alright ban. In Worlds play-ins, there was a bit more emphasis on the Caitlyn Ashe matchup, so perhaps what they were doing here is that they banned Ashe to encourage V3 to first pick Caitlyn. This would pretty much be a scenario in which both teams thought that Kate Ashe were a very good picks, so perhaps it was like if one of them's banned, then we should pick the other. Again, we don't know this for sure. The teams don't often talk about their processes behind drafting. We have to pretty much take the information that we know at hand and look at patterns and then take a guess as to what a team might possibly be thinking. Unless, of course, again, they just straight out say, hey, we think X, Y, or Z. Now, VV decided to do something which is, in my opinion, just god-awful. Just god-awful. They decided to ban Lucian on blue side. Now, the biggest reason that this is terrible is that in this meta, when you were red side, you pretty much had to ban or give away Lucian. So either V3 did not have a good read on Lucian, or maybe their mid laner ace just did not play Lucian. In either case, there's a problem somewhere, and I just think this is probably the worst blue side third ban I've seen entire Worlds run. Now ULL's last ban is going to be Nidalee. And this is completely fine, same reasons I stated before. We saw this in the previous two other games, but more importantly, I would say this is also who's piloting it again, because Bug-Eye actually had a high affinity for AP junglers, so taking away two of them really does limit his champion pool. Now V3 decided to pick Caitlyn here, and this makes a lot of sense with Ashe off the board. What teams actually thought during play-ins was that Caitlyn and Ashe were by far the best two ADCs in bot lane. So the fact that Ashe was off the board makes a lot of sense given the context. So UOL decided to actually go for Orianna first pick, which is super interesting. This is because even though Orianna is a safe blind pick and tells a little about what you want to do with the team's identity, you don't actually usually see this done too often on red side. Usually you're trying to get a strong 2v2, usually in the form of bot lane. However, UOL are a very let's just call them a weird team, you know, they really like thinking outside the box. And what you're actually going to see here is that since they pick Caitlyn, they go for another strong blind pick. We see this in the Graves, and this makes a ton of sense. Graves Orianna as a fine mid lane and jungle duo. Again, it comes down to the fact that they are both blindable, and also the fact that they tell you very little information about what you actually want to do. And again, they are actually very good as a 2v2 jungle mid duo. Now V3 decide that their second pick is going to be Scion. And Scion is just very weird. Again, this is the idea that, yeah, Scion is blindable top, but you actually still have a few more options that you could take off the table. Maybe it was just a really big preference for their top laner, Paz. But again, this is one of the things that we have no idea what they are actually thinking unless they say in public, hey, this is what we are thinking. And for the third pick is also very weird. They actually decided to go for Karthus here. And the context in which it makes sense is that Bug-Eye did really enjoy playing AP junglers whenever possible. However, the problem with Karthus is that, first off, you know he's not going to be a flex. He's just... well, especially since Orianna has already shown, you know that threat does exist. That just is a matchup that Karthus does not want to be into, and he actually loses to a bunch more matchups anyways. So you pretty much have to put him in jungle. But the problem is that Graves could actually invade him fairly easily. And although they both have like similar goals where they both do want to farm up and scale up, Graves is actually just a bit more flexible. He's able to work with more comps, and he's actually able to do vertical jungling. He's able to get over a Dragon Pit, Baron Pit, for example. So overall, I would say that Karthus really limits what they can do and was not a very wise pick, I would say. And now we're going to see UL decide to go for Camille as a response to the Scion. This is completely fine. Camille is a blindable champion, but in this case, she's facing against Scion, which is completely acceptable for her. So no big whoops here. I wouldn't say too much about it besides the fact that, hey, good pick. Now UL decide to go for a ban I'm not sure I entirely agree with. They decide to ban Leona here, which doesn't make too much sense to me. Caitlyn and Leona have different goals when it comes to laning phase. But more importantly, I would say is that whenever you pick Caitlyn, you need to pick a support who can actually have a lot of good trap setup. This is why we see something like Lux Morgana get paired with Caitlyn often. So I just didn't think this was a very wise use of a ban by UL. V3 decided to go for a Bard ban here, which is interesting. I would say this is partly in response to Leona game ban, since Leona does counter Bard, especially when it comes to in lane. But I would also say it's possibly that they thought maybe UL was playing weak side, because from what they know, Graves and Camille are possibly people that you could funnel resources into and actually win the game for that way, and Bard could help with that. And also, again, UL is just a weird team. They usually like playing champions that nobody else is really playing, or they kind of just play on the fringe, and Bard would be one of those champions. UL dedicate their last ban to Pantheon, which is fine, because Pantheon does have a bit better setup than Leona when it comes to actually setting up for gate traps. Also, Pantheon could actually roam around better to actually enable the Karthus, which could be a win condition for V3, so completely fine here. Now V3's last ban is going to be Twitch, and this can be seen in two ways. It could be seen, one, as a comfort ban against them, since Gadget did have a high affinity for playing Twitch, but also the fact that it could just be saying, hey, we think you're going to play weak side, because you pretty much have two strong champions in the solo lane, and also Graves is a strong champion that you could win through. So it completely made sense given all the context. Now UL have quite a few support champions banned out, and they pretty much opted for the Nahlis pick here. Nahlis works with a lot of comps, can't really complain about too much, especially considering who was banned at this point. So yep, alright pick in my opinion. Now, V3 decide that they pretty much have to pick for their support, and they have to pick for their mid laner. So their first pick is actually going to be Set, and I do not like this too much. It's not exactly fantastic into Nahlis, and it's not very good with Kate as a duo. Usually if you're picking Set support, you have some form of engage on your AC. Usually that comes in the form of Ashe, Varus, or Senna. This is the most common pairings that we actually saw with Set. And also their fifth pick is going to be Galio, and Galio doesn't make a ton of sense either. If you are looking at this and thinking Orianna's mid, Orianna just wave clears permanently. It's not a very good pick. And also, who exactly are you enabling? Are you enabling Scion? Are you engaging with the Set? Are you pretty much protecting Carcass. What exactly is the game plan here? It seems very out of place in my opinion. So UL have one last pick left for their R5. So what they decide to do, and now what they do here is something I absolutely loved, and I think is something that just no other team would even think of doing. They decide to actually pick Cassin here, send a mid, and send Orianna bot. Now, is this a good decision? And I would say yes, it is. And I'm going to explain why. This is because Orianna, even though she has low base armor, and she can get a little bit poked out by the Caitlyn, is actually mostly protected by the Nihilus, so it doesn't even matter. All Nihilus has to do, actually, with this Orianna, is just get her to pretty much her 1-2 item mark, and then she could just wave clear permanently. She'll never have to interact with the Caitlyn. And Cassin pretty much gets a free lane to scale in versus the Galio. So you pretty much have a counter pick in the mid lane, and also you get a bot lane, which is pretty much not very interactive. Overall, I would think this is a very creative draft by UL that I enjoyed immensely. And also, I will leave a link to the VODs of each game so you can actually see how these comps play out for themselves. And if you saw just one of them, I would highly recommend V3 versus UL, because that was just an absolute banger of a game. And this has been League of Legends 101. Let me know what you thought of this video down below. And remember guys, every day is a school day.